Months now, a little over 2 months, we have been hearing the pastors preach on Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. Paul has written approximately 1/3 of the New Testament. This particular book, 1 Corinthians, was written prior to the Gospels. Paul's significance to us and our faith and to the Christian church cannot be overstated. He is very, very important to all of us and to where our Christian church is today. Last Sunday, Pastor Randy preached on the 15th chapter. It's called the Resurrection chapter. And in that chapter, we were reminded once again of our victory through Christ over sin and death, that we are a part of this resurrection. We heard Paul's proclamation, "Thanks be to God, who gives us the victory over death through our Lord Jesus Christ. He has risen, and so shall we. The stone has been rolled away. Life awaits, lies ahead for each one of us, and for the rest of the story, our story." The rest of the story is my sermon theme. How many of you know who said, "Good day"? I'll give you another hint. Oh, there's one in the back. Paul Harvey. He also said, "And the rest of the story." Paul Harvey was a radio broadcaster. He started broadcasting in 1952, the year that I joined the Coast Guard. For 56 years, 24 million people listened to him every week. He died in 2009, 1 year after retiring. He died at the age of 90. He would conclude his broadcasts with, "And the rest of the story." One of his stories that he talked about in October of 1990 begins like this. Two young firemen entered a tire warehouse in Southern California, fully engulfed in flames. It was filled with smoke. Visibility was very poor. As they entered, they bumped into some drums filled with liquid, and they knew they had to get out of there as soon as possible. As they were withdrawing, a 50-foot long wall of an 8-foot high facade that sat on top of the building fell on them as they were exiting. The first man out was trapped by his legs. He was spotted and quickly rescued. The second man completely disappeared beneath the wall, the flaming wall. Under the flaming wall, that fireman was holding his breath because his oxygen tank had been crushed. The face mask had been ripped off of his face. He had a broken ankle, an injured shoulder. He had second and third degree burns on his back because coals went behind his jacket onto his back and neck area. He was unable to breathe or call out for help, because if he would have taken a breath or tried to call out for help, he would have seared his lungs and he would have died. So he is there under the wall, holding his breath. And like Paul Harvey, I'm going to let you wait for the rest of that story, because we've got to talk a little bit about the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul, in the 19th chapter of 1 Corinthians, is not thinking about himself. Paul is in the process of completing his second missionary journey. He completes a third missionary journey. Some say he even went as far as Spain, but he wanted to go west. We do know that he said these words. Towards verses 1 through 4, he's thinking of the Corinthians and of Timothy and Apollos and other people. He's not thinking about himself. And he had a lot of things he could be thinking about, his own future and himself. He could have been selfish, but he was not. And he pleads that the church in Corinth would take up an offering for the home church in Jerusalem. They were suffering under persecution. and they needed some help, and Paul even offered to carry the offering to Jerusalem. In verses 5 through 7, he looks forward to his return someday to Corinth and the church there, and he says, when I return, it will not be just a, hi, I'm here and I'm gone. He wanted a meaningful visit with them again. So he's thinking of the people in Corinth. And then he admonishes them to welcome Timothy and Apollos, who are going to be arriving to carry on his ministry there. And then verses 8 through 9, and I feel I've saved the best till last. But I will stay in Ephesus until Pentecost, for the door for effective work is open for me, but there will be many adversaries. Be watchful, he says. Stand firm in your faith. Be courageous, be strong. Let all be done in love. And so he's repeating from the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, which is a story about the importance of love for us. Paul would go on to Ephesus and stay there 3 years. He stayed there longer than any other city with the exception of Rome, which was the last city that he visited. Paul has another 20 years or so of ministry ahead of him. He was about in his late 40s at this time. We know that he completed that third missionary journey, and then he went to Jerusalem, where he was arrested, and he was all set to go to trial, but he pulled out an ace card, pulled a fast one. He said, I don't want to be tried here in Jerusalem. I'm a Roman citizen. I have a right to be tried before the emperor of Rome. And his request had to be granted. And so he was on the way then to Rome. By the time he got to Rome, and when he requested that, he probably didn't know who was going to be the next emperor of Rome. And that was maybe a mistake. But anyway, he was where he wanted to be. He arrived in Rome. A young, homicidal, paranoid young man, a killer in fact, was the emperor of Rome by the time he got there. A fellow by the name of Nero. He was not a very nice guy. And in fact, he killed his mother, tried to kill her once and failed, and then was successful the second time. He killed at least one of his sisters, maybe two. He was the one that blamed the Christians for the burning of Rome. Some say he was fiddling while Rome burned. And he blamed the Christians, and also you realize that Paul did go before the emperor, and in 68 AD, Paul was beheaded by Nero, and 2 months or 1 month later, Nero committed suicide. Now, for the rest of Paul's story, you're going to have to join one of the Bible study classes on the story that's arriving soon, because they'll eventually get to Paul after they've been through the Old Testament. So I want you to join and take a look at Paul's story. It's extremely important. Paul's life was not all fun and games, but he was where he wanted to be, completing his story and his missionary journey to Rome. Paul followed his own advice. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong, and last but not least, do all in love. The young fireman is still holding his breath under the wall. Fortunately for that young fireman, the team's engineer was Larry Abundez. He was nicknamed Mongo by his fellow firemen because he was a strong man. He was 6'4", a power lifter. And he yelled out, "Where are you? We can't see you. Where are you, Mark Eide?" My son was that fireman. He was able to get his hand and his arm up through that flaming wall. They spotted him, and he was able to crawl to safety and to life. That's not the end of the story. Paul gifted Larry with a puppy that he had named Trauma. And Larry and Trauma would walk in the hills above Rancho Cucamonga when they were towards evening usually, but quite often for a morning walk as well. One day, trauma refused to leave home. And so Larry gave it up and stayed home, and he collapsed on the living room floor of a massive heart attack. He was unable to reach the phone and call for help. Trauma, the dog, brought him the phone, and he was able to dial 911 and receive help and life. So that's the end of Paul Harvey's story. Firemen, policemen, and the military, they have to be a team in order to survive. I believe the Christian community needs to do the same. We need to bind together and help one another so that we can survive in this world of ours. And so our message for the day is, let's be bound together in love and do everything in love. We are a part of a team. We are part of a community. We are a neighborhood, a church, a family. The tomb is open. He is risen. And so shall we. Jesus wants us to rise up and live the rest of our story. Amen.